Chapter 1. Approaching the Unruly World of Craft Beer. The craft beer world can seem vast and impenetrable. There are so many breweries, so many types of beer, so much history, and so many points of entry. It's no wonder people wave away the whole thing and say, "I'm not a beer drinker." Yet there's a world of innovative, enticing, invigorating ales and lagers out there. Even if you don't consider yourself a beer person, is there something out there you might like? Where do you start? It's not surprising that so many people get turned off by beer early on. Our introduction to beer so often comes in the form of a Bud Light handed to us at a party. If a fizzy, vaguely bitter, and somewhat grainy yellow drink isn't to your taste, you might have decided to stick with more exciting, flavorful options like wine or cocktails. That makes sense. The good news, if you've decided to see what this whole craft beer scene is about, is that you are about to enter a world of robust, innovative, tasty potables that will make you forget all about that tepid Bud. So, let's start by charting our point of approach for craft beer. Lesson 1. Think about other things you like to drink. There are a lot of different beers out there. The bad news is that it can be intimidating for someone new to the scene. But that's also the good news. Today, beer is so varied and is evolving at such a fast pace that you can be guaranteed to find something to your taste. Are you a Merlot drinker? Try Deschutes Brewing's Mirror Mirror, a dark, strong ale aged in red wine casks. Like whiskey? Try one of 50/50 Brewing Eclipse Stouts, which are conditioned in different bourbon barrels. Grimm Artisanal Ales has a series of tart, light Berliner Weisse-style beers that incorporate vanilla bean and fruits, perfect for a cream soda lover. There is a beer out there for every taste right now. You just have to familiarize yourself with the options. Lesson 2. Are ales and lagers different things? You can think of ales and lagers as the two families of beer. Pretty much every beer style falls into one of these two camps. The difference has to do with how each family is fermented. Yeast is the mechanism by which unfermented beer, or wort, becomes alcoholic beer. Ales use top fermenting yeast, which does its work in higher temperatures. Stouts, porters, barley wines, IPAs, and lambics are all ales. Conversely, lagers use bottom fermenting yeast, which requires lower temperatures. Lagers tend to be, but aren't always, lighter and crisper. Lesson 3. What is a beer style? First, let's take a moment to discuss, in broad terms, how you brew beer. You start by steeping malted grain in hot water, kind of like you're making a bread tea. Then you boil the resulting sugary concoction with hops, a plant that imparts bitterness and some flavors. Finally, you pitch in the aforementioned yeast and let the whole thing ferment over the coming weeks. This yeast also creates carbon dioxide, which gives the beer its natural effervescence. Knowing this process, we can now discuss how variations in each of its steps and ingredients can create different styles of beer. For example, malts. Depending on the malted grain you use, you can change the taste, smell, color, and consistency of the resulting beverage. Lagers and pale ales often use Pilsner and two-row malts. Stouts use Munich, black, and chocolate malts, as well as roasted barley, for a darker hue and fuller taste. Wheat beers, unsurprisingly, incorporate wheat in the malt bill. The more malted grain you use, the more sugar is produced and the more alcohol is converted by the yeast. So, huge boozy ales like barley wines or Belgian quads have large malt bills. Hops. As stated before, hops impart bitterness and flavor. Their presence is especially prominent in IPAs. When you add them early in the boil, they make the resulting beer more bitter. When you add them later, or dry hop during fermentation, they will produce more fruity, earthy flavors and less raw bitterness. In more malt-focused beers, hops are less pronounced. For example, sweet Belgian Abbey beers often use aged hop plants, which impart more muted spice and herbal notes. Yeast. Yeast produces alcohol and carbonation, but it also contributes a lot of flavors. Certain yeasts are endemic to specific styles. For example, farmhouse ales use a yeast strain that converts or attenuates a lot of sugar and imparts spicy and estery notes. Wild ales, like Belgian lambic, often use airborne cultures that create a funky, sour character. These are just a few examples of how the brewing process produces different styles of beer. Bear in mind, while styles are officially regulated in beer competitions, they can be more amorphous in the real world. Most beers hew to a given style, but many straddle lines and play with conventions. So don't be surprised if you come across a blonde stout or a sour IPA. That's all part of the weird fun. Lesson 4. With so many styles out there, don't be afraid to pick and choose. Bearing in mind what was discussed above, don't fret about liking the beer that beer nerds tell you is the best. If IPAs are too bitter for your palate right now, skip them. They aren't going anywhere. The same goes for that 17% ABV barrel-aged pastry stout everyone is raving about at the bar. If you like big, chocolatey beers that make your vision go a little blurry, go for it. Otherwise, there are plenty of lighter, more delicate brews to select instead. Lesson 5. Get acquainted with your local options. Today there are over 8,000 breweries in the United States. California has the most with nearly 1,000. Per capita, Vermont has the highest concentration of breweries. Wherever you live in this country, you probably have a brewery within a short driving distance. It's always a great idea to start locally when you're becoming acquainted with craft beer. For one thing, most beer tastes best fresh, and your local beer maker will have the freshest product. You will also have access to their new and limited releases, and who knows, you might be living near the next super hyped brewery. Lesson 6. Top-rated breweries are not regulated to one area of the country. The website Rate Beer's 2020 Top 10 Rated Breweries included 9 U.S. craft brewers. They are located in New England, the Midwest, the South, and the West Coast. Only one is located in a U.S. city with a top 10 population, AleSmith Brewing in San Diego. The other 8 are located in mid-size markets. The top-rated brewer in America, Hill Farmstead Brewery, operates out of Greensboro, Vermont, with a population of 762 people. It goes to prove that you don't need to live in a major metropolis or a hyper-specific area of the country to have access to world-class beer. Lesson 7. Get to know your local bartenders, beer tenders, and bottle sellers. Do you know who knows a lot about beer? Beer professionals. Heck, they may even know more than I do. Folks that brew, pour, and sell craft beer have as wide a breadth of knowledge as one can imagine. Place yourself in their hands, and they will steer you well. They can tailor their recommendations to your preferences and offer some context for the dizzying options out there. And being someone's beer resource is a privilege for most of them. You could liken it to a record store employee back when such things existed, pressing a favorite band's album into a customer's hands. Find a local taproom worker, bottle shop worker, or bartender that you trust, and you will never want for good beer intel. Lesson 8. Beer is a drink to be paired. Think of it as a menu item. One of the roadblocks to starting with craft beer is approaching it as a goal unto itself. Many first-timers look at shelf upon shelf of strange ales with wacky labels and in-joke names and wonder which one will taste good. A more productive and less rage-inducing question might be, which one will taste best with tonight's dinner? Simple as this might sound, it can make all the difference. Rather than looking for some undefinable good beer, think about what might work with that steak you're making tonight. Personally, I love choosing a good Saison-style ale to pair with Thanksgiving dinner, a farmhouse beer for a farmhouse meal that really pulls the dining experience together. Ever do breakfast for dinner? Why not pour a huge coffee-infused breakfast stout to go with those nighttime pancakes and bacon? Thinking about beer pairings might also compel you to try styles that you wouldn't otherwise try. Lesson 9. Some beers are refreshing, some are night enders. Think about which beers fit which events. Would you drink a big glass of Cabernet by a pool in 100-degree weather? What about a frosty, cool gin and tonic in front of a fire on a winter night? There's nothing wrong with doing either of those choices. However, some drinks pair best with certain situations. The same is true for beer. So think of your craft beers as accompaniments to your day. A well-fermented sour would be great for that poolside afternoon, and a barrel-aged wheat wine would warm you up on a snowy night. Lesson 10. Knowing the difference between craft and crafty. Remember once upon a time when there were 3 beer options out there, and they all looked and tasted virtually the same? As you can imagine, the rise in craft beer's popularity has eaten into the market share of macro beer conglomerates like AB InBev or Molson Coors. In 2019, craft brewers, as defined by the Brewers Association, represented 13.6% of the U.S. beer market, compared to 7.9% a decade earlier. That growth comes at the expense of the big boys. How have they responded? In addition to a flurry of ads meant to paint craft beer drinkers to effete snobs, see Budweiser's Dilly Dilly campaign, they have tried building inroads into the craft market with a series of crafty options. Crafty labels from macro conglomerates. Ask somebody what their favorite craft beer is, and you might hear Blue Moon, Steel Reserve, or Landshark. These labels were actually all developed and produced by the big 3 American brands. The first is a Coors beer, the second comes from Miller, and the last is a Budweiser brand. Craft breweries acquired by macro conglomerates. The big 3 macro brewers have been on a bit of a shopping spree over the last decade. What they're buying are craft brewers. The highest profile of these is Anheuser-Busch's high-end stable. This group of acquisitions includes Blue Point, 10 Barrel, Elysian, Golden Road, Breckenridge, and the jewel in their crown, Goose Island. There's nothing inherently inferior about crafty beers. Blue Moon, for example, is an excellent example of the traditional Witbier. Goose Island's annual Bourbon County brand release is still one of the year's hallmark beer events. Additionally, you can't argue that a payday from a big brewer is a worthwhile reward for craft owners that struggled in a low-margin business for a long time. However, drinkers should be aware that these acquired brands are part of a production and distribution Goliath. You often see Blue Point Toasted Lager and Goose Island 312 on the same tap list or grocery shelf as Bud Light because AB InBev uses its distribution pipeline to force out independent craft brands. Luckily, beer drinkers have an easy way to know if a beer is craft or crafty. The Brewers Association has a seal for independent brands. It appears on all bottles, cans, and packaging. If you don't see the seal, there's a decent shot the product is crafty. You can find information on the BA seal at www.brewer-association.org/independent-craft-brewer-seal. Lesson 11. This shouldn't be work. Find pals to take the journey with you. Finally, there's no reason to take this trip alone. Exploring the wild, bustling world of craft beer is improved by having someone to share the ride. See if your significant other wants to join the fun, so you can choose a growler of local ale to pair with your dinner. Rope in some buddies and incorporate zany brews into your game day spread. What about opening a 750-milliliter bottle of stout on movie night? Trivia night at a craft-centric gastropub? The whole idea is to make this a social endeavor because beer is now, and has always been, a social drink. Prost! It's reasonable to be wary of the craft beer world. The selection can be harrowing, the terminology confusing, and, candidly, the community can be pretty insular. But that does not mean that beer lovers want to lock the doors on new arrivals. On the contrary, there's nothing quite as invigorating for a beer nerd as introducing someone to a beer that opens their eyes and their palate. I can attest to this personally. Chapter Review. I hope this will be an exciting journey for you and that you don't feel undue pressure. To recap, when figuring out what beer you might like, think about other drinks you enjoy. Some beers draw from the flavor profiles of wine, spirits, soda, milkshakes, and more. Start local. You probably have a brewery near you, and it can provide you with the freshest product around. Draw from the knowledge of beer servers and beer sellers. They want to help you find your new favorite beverage. Feel free to pick and choose. You will prefer certain styles over others, so explore and drink what you like. Make this process fun. Have friends and family join you. Make craft beer part of your recreational framework, pairing particular brews with particular meals and events. My goal is to get you excited, impart some knowledge, and demystify this unruly world of craft beer. I'm confident that the chapters that follow will pique your interest and make you thirsty. So let's get moving. There's a lot to cover.